Hi everyone and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be taking you through my process for creating my logo for my business. My business is an indie publishing business. It's at the startup stage, so I'm in the process of organizing and figuring out next projects and building up the skills to do those next projects. This is the logo that I created for it. Tafeda is my middle name and hence you get Tafeda Publishing. For this logo, I wanted the typography to be unique, in other words, designed by myself, rather than going and paying for a font design that has already been made by somebody else. I also wanted an icon just because when I have my website up and running, on the tab, you can put an icon. And given that the space for the icon is only a small circle, I would need an icon to fit in there rather than the text for my logo. I designed this logo last year when I was first getting back into graphic design. A year later, I still love it, but my issue with the logo is the same thing I had last year, which is the icon. You might notice that the wing of the butterfly, the top right wing I should say, just looks a little bit odd. I've wanted to alter this for the longest time, but I still haven't got round to it even now at this point. Before I designed this logo, I went out there, read some books, looked at some tutorials online to try and figure out the basics of typography. In terms of my design process, it's pretty much the same as if I was to do an illustration or any other creative project. The first step is always on paper with a pencil coming up or sketching designs. This was one of those lucky projects where I didn't have to do tons and tons of sketches to come up with the final idea. In this case, I simply sketched out the word Tafeda and I liked the way the F looked. From that F, I then designed the rest of the letters. There are certain characteristics in the F that I really liked. The first is that it's slightly slanted, and then I really like where the curves are in the letters as well. Before I sketched out the final lettering though, I did do some research and try to see if there are fonts with similar styles to this one. I did come across another one which had curves in it, but the curves were on the opposite end to what I had done. For that reason, I felt there was really nothing wrong with me adding my curves in. Other characteristics of this letter style that I opted for is the lines, the middle lines or strokes for the E and the F are slightly raised up. And that's just because if that stroke was placed with an equal distance between the top line and the baseline, despite being mathematically correct, it would actually look odd. And this leads me to the first lesson I learned with typography, which is that sometimes what is mathematically correct doesn't look right. In other words, we really have to rely on our own judgment to come up with a design rather than using mathematics to create what looks or sounds logically right, but the eye just doesn't perceive it as being right. The other aspect of this lettering is that I wanted it to be bold, but the final lettering I went for wasn't as bold as what I originally drew out in my book. And finally, I opted for a sans serif font rather than a serif font. The serifs are those little tiny strokes that come off of the ends of a stroke, and they tend to give a very formal feel. When I was researching different logos for publishing businesses, I did come across some formal ones, such as Bloomsbury, but then I came across less formal ones, and which are more in line with the logo I went with in the end, and these were from the likes of DC and Marvel and Dark Horse Publishing. In other words, the very traditional publishers, the old school publishers, tended to have the serif font style, and I would say the more kind of hip logos or the more modernized logos came from publishers that were publishing graphic novels. When I looked at my own business, I realized that I wanted to prioritize illustrated works, whether that be graphic novels or children's picture books or illustrated novels. I knew that I wanted illustration to be a focal point of the types of books I publish. For that reason, I decided to follow the precedent set by the logo designs of graphic novel publishers. And that's why I opted for a sans serif font in the end, and also why I kept my font bold. There's also other reasons why I wanted my logo to be thick. The first is that personality-wise, I'm a very bold person. I like thick contrasts, strong colours, and bold is a natural option for me. The second is that I wanted my logo to give the impression of authority, like, yes, this publishing business knows what it's doing, and bold screams confidence and authority. Also, wanting this very strong and authoritative feel, I opted to make the font not quite pure black, but just slightly under, so a very, very, very dark grey. And this has the impression of giving a strong outlook, but not being so overbearing like pure black and white can be. When I was a teenager, I loved pure black against contrasting colours like lime green, yellows. But as an adult, although I love black, I don't quite want the full intensity of it, so I try to take away some of that blackness, and that's what you'll see with this logo in the end. It's not pure black, but it's very close. After sketching out my design in my lettering book, and yes, I have a lettering book, I then took it into Photoshop and tried to neaten up the lines. You might recall from my last video on my children's book logo that at the time I didn't have Photoshop CC, which means that there are a lot of functions that would have made life easier, but I couldn't get access to until I could do the 1 week free trial, budget being very tight at that time. What you'll see instead is that I took my letters into Photoshop Elements and tried to fix up the spacing as well as I could. Once I took it into Illustrator to vectorize it within the 1 week free trial, the sizing did change a little bit just because it's a lot more accurate to be able to use the full features that Illustrator has. The icon of my logo is a very abstract looking butterfly, and it comes from a scribble that my then 1-year-old niece had done when she was first grabbing hold of crayons and just scribbling around. The reason why I selected this particular scribble is because it looked very much like a butterfly, and a butterfly has this huge importance to me because it's based on the first words that my cousin had ever spoken to me. My cousin, when she was little, actually even now, she has a hole in her heart, and when she was an infant, she didn't really socialize with many people because her mother kept her very close to her. And she was also a very shy little girl, so no matter how much people tried to make her speak to them, she just wouldn't say a word. When she was about 3 years old, I went to stay with her. I played with her, never really expecting her to speak to me, so it was kind of a lot of signing and yes or no questions. But by the end of the day, she was showing me a coat she had, and on it was a belt, and the buckle was a butterfly. She pointed at it and went, "It's a butterfly." And I looked at her completely surprised because that's the first time she had ever said anything, not only to me, but to anyone outside of her own mum, dad, and brother. As soon as I asked her, "It's a butterfly," she looked at me like she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and then she ran to the other end of the room and started playing and pretending like nothing happened. About an hour later, she started to speak to me, and for several years after that, I was the only person other than her mum, her dad and brother that she ever spoke to. A butterfly therefore has huge significance to me. And in this generation, my niece has huge significance to me. So when my niece managed to scribble a butterfly, I felt like I've just hit 2 birds with 1 stone, because now I have something that comes from my niece and something that's connected to the other important person in my life. In terms of future activities, I first of all plan on fixing the top right wing of that butterfly icon. Second of all, I need to create another version of the logo which should say to Fader Art, because I have another website dedicated to my art which includes photography, illustration and graphic design. Talking about future activities, looking back on that Naughty Nisha logo video, something I didn't realize last year when I was making it, but with clean, fresh eyes I can see it now, is that I need to fix the spacing between the letters. That's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing my process for creating my logo, and if you do enjoy content like this, graphic design and also photography, then please do subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you next time.